Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for a River Hero Homes webinar about local ecotype plants. My name is Justin Doyle, and I'm the James River Association's Director of Community Conservation. I will be your moderator for the duration of the webinar, and I want to extend a special thank you to Altria and DuPont Clear in the Future for supporting a River Hero Homes program and making this webinar possible. Over the next 30 to 45 minutes, you will learn about the James River Association's River Hero Homes program, native plants, and in particular, local ecotype plants. I will provide a brief overview of our River Hero Homes program, then turn things over to our special guests, Bill Shanabruch and Stacey Moulds of Local Ecotype Richmond Natives, or LERN. Your questions are appreciated, so please submit any questions you may have via the Zoom chat feature, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the webinar. All right, let's get started. As I think all of you know, every time it rains, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and bacteria from pet waste are carried into our local waterways and ultimately the James River by stormwater runoff. This is stormwater pollution. Stormwater pollution adversely impacts the health of the James River, and reducing it is a focal point of the River Hero Homes program. Our River Hero Homes members make up a community of stewards that realize the first step to a healthier James River starts at home. The program empowers residents of the 10,000 square mile watershed to contribute to a healthy James River by implementing river-friendly conservation practices at home. In short, River Hero Homes is a solution to stormwater pollution. This infographic from RVH2O illustrates stormwater runoff and how it can be detrimental to our local waterways. Stormwater runoff occurs when rain falls and snow melts on impervious surfaces like rooftops, driveways, sidewalks, and roads. Stormwater runoff can pick up pollutants, trash, and debris as it flows across these impervious surfaces and flows into storm drains and local waterways. Stormwater pollution occurs when polluted stormwater runoff reaches a local waterway. River Hero Homes members pledge to commit to a minimum of 3 of 5 river-friendly conservation practices that reduce stormwater runoff at home. The 5 practices are pick up pet waste to prevent bacteria pollution, use regionally native plants and remove invasive plants in gardens and landscapes, reduce or eliminate herbicide and pesticide use to promote a healthy ecosystem, reduce or eliminate fertilizer use to reduce nutrient pollution entering our waterways and encourage healthy soil by using compost, and reduce household water use and install rain barrel to harvest rainwater for watering needs if possible. Today, we have the opportunity to learn more about a new local nonprofit organization, Local Ecotype Richmond Natives, also known as LERN. LERN provides education on the value of local wild plant populations to inspire conservation efforts. LERN also grows and distributes plants propagated from locally collected seeds to benefit native flora and fauna in the greater Richmond area. We are excited to have the founders of LERN here with us today, Bill Shanabruch and Stacey Moulds. Bill Shanabruch is president and co-founder of LERN. Previously, he started the Reedy Creek Environmental Nursery in 2016 to address the scarcity of native plants of local ecotype in the Metro Richmond area. He has also been involved in volunteer efforts to remove invasive plants in the city of Richmond parks for over 10 years and has served on the James River Park System Invasive Plant Task Force for the last 5 years. Stacey Moulds is the vice president and co-founder of LERN. Stacey's experience includes 30 years of a wide variety of work and volunteer experience in the environmental, horticultural, nonprofit, and engineering consulting industries. She owns Domestica Landscapes, LLC, a landscape design company that prioritizes the use of native as well as edible plants. She was a founding member of the nonprofit organization Tricycle Gardens and served on the board from 2002 until 2013. She serves as the Jefferson Avenue Community Gardens volunteer manager and has served in this position since 2003. Pretty incredible. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bill and Stacey. I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Justin. I'm not sure. Can you guys see us and hear us?
We could see you and hear you.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks for joining us today. Like Justin said, we're gonna talk to you about native plants and specifically local ecotype native plants. And this picture here is actually the native Pinkster bloom azalea that is in bloom it's probably still in bloom. It was in bloom a couple weeks ago at a bunch of the James River Park sites. You can go to the next slide if you like. So before we talk about what local ecotype plants are, we thought we needed to define native plants. And I know some of this may be a little repetitive, but just a native plant is one that occurs naturally in a particular region. And really the easiest way to define it is basically prior to settlement in North America by Europeans. And the area really needs to be defined geographically to define where a native plant is native to, where it's native to. You can't really meaningfully say where it's native without explaining what your geographic region is. And you can go to the next slide. And just without, I think probably you've already had some presentations about native plants. We won't go on too much, but why are they so important? In addition to really, they form the base of our food web, and in addition, they attract a variety of birds and butterflies, all the pollinators, and other wildlife, mammals, and because they provide such a diverse habitat and food sources. And really, because the native plants and the animals have evolved together in a particular location, they all support each other. And one book that has really helped explain this to people is shown here. It's by Doug Tallamy. He's an entomologist with University of Delaware, and he's written a number of books, but this was his first one, and it does a great job of explaining to people without being too technical and really too preachy, I guess. Just explaining why native plants are important. And it all starts with insects, and particularly he talks a lot about caterpillars, which you'll notice it's in our logo. And caterpillars are the main source of food for songbirds. So even birds that in their adult life will eat, nuts or fruits, most songbirds, their young depend on caterpillars. And so without caterpillars, you're not going to have birds. And then without birds, you're not going to have higher level mammals eating those birds. So just really just helps bring it home why native plants are important. And you can go on to the next slide. They also are really important because, and I think this ties in with the River Hero Homes program, they're adapted to the climate here and the soils here. So native plants are going to use less water, so you're not going to have to irrigate them like you do your lawns or your rose bushes. They generally are not going to require fertilizer because they're adapted to the soils that are there. And they're not going to generally require pesticides, because if you have a healthy native plant population, you're going to have a healthy insect population, which is going to help with the diseases and pests that your plants might be attacked by. They also will help with the stormwater, which is why we're here today. And they help with that stormwater when it's running off of those impervious surfaces that you showed pictures of, Justin. And the next slide really kind of helps demonstrate why they're so good for stormwater management. You can see in this picture here, all of the plants except for the one on the left are all various native plants, and it shows, you can see their root systems are going down 1 to 2 or more feet. And so every time it rains, those roots have penetrated the soil, and they've opened up spaces in the soil where water can infiltrate rather than washing off. And on the very top, on the left, is basically what our turf grass, how far their roots go down, which you can see is like 1 to 2 inches. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bill, and he's going to talk more specifically about local ecotype native plants.
Next slide, please. So in order to understand why local ecotype native plants are important, it's good to spend a minute talking about the geographic ranges of some native plants. So there's two examples on this slide. On the left is shaded in sort of a greenish blue, is the geographic range of black haw viburnum, a really nice native shrub. And what you'll see is that it covers most of the eastern half of the United States. On the right is gray goldenrod, and there the red is where it's native, and basically it's native east of the Rockies. So what you can see is that some native plants have very wide geographic ranges. And the point of local ecotype is that not every native plant is the same. It's dependent on where they've been grown. So the next slide defines local ecotype for us. Local ecotype is a subset of a species or a population of a species that has adapted to a specific geographic environment, and as a result has evolved to be genetically distinct from other members of the same species found in different environments. In other words, if you have a native plant from the Richmond area, it is not going to be genetically the same as a population of plants from northern Minnesota, because they've been evolving there over a long period of time. And so each population will be adapted for where it's at. So the plants from Richmond will be adapted to the climate and soils here. The same species, a population of the same species in northern Minnesota is going to be adapted for that particular climate and soils. So not all native plants are the same for a given species. It really depends where that genetic population came from. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So recognizing that where a plant comes from is why we started LERN, Local Ecotype Richmond Natives. And on this slide, this shows you what we're calling our service area. And it basically consists of Richmond, Henrico, Chesterfield, and all the counties that abut Henrico and Chesterfield. So it's about roughly 30 miles radius from Richmond. And all the plants that LERN will be propagating will be propagated from seeds that are collected from wild populations within our service area. So you know you're getting a local ecotype plant that is really genetically adapted for where we are. Next slide. So before going on to the next slide, I wanted to briefly define a couple sort of relevant terms. Because in the nursery trade, you'll see different terms applied to native plants. Some people refer to cultivars as nativars. These are essentially native plants that have been altered in some way, selected for particular traits. And an example here is Coreopsis verticillata, world Coreopsis. And on the left is what's called a straight species. This is the way populations of world Coreopsis look like in nature. And what you can see are three cultivars, all with different flower colors. Sometimes the change in cultivar might be to make a plant less leggy or a dwarf as opposed to something real tall and floppy. Sometimes it has to do with leaves. Sometimes it'll be double flowers, etc. So there's lots of different cultivars out there. And then there's straight species as well. A straight species just means a wild natural population of the species. But remember that wild population, that straight species, could come from very different places geographically. Okay, with that as the background, this is sort of the key slide we want to spend a little time talking about today, the next slide. This is a little scorecard about local ecotype versus straight species and cultivars. So the first thing I want to talk about is how well a local ecotype plant versus the other ones are going to be adapted to your local site. So if you have a local ecotype plant for Richmond, 3 pluses, by the way, is the maximum in this scorecard. So the local ecotype for Richmond is going to get 3 pluses because it's from a wild population, it's adapted to the site, it's going to perform very well. Now notice the adaptation to local site is what you're interested in if you want to buy a plant that's going to do well in your landscape. Okay, so straight species, that one really depends on the source. A straight species for gray goldenrod could have come from Minnesota, it could have come from Texas, Maine, etc. And that's something we'll talk about later is, if at all possible, if you're buying straight species from somewhere, you want to ask them where it came from genetically, where was the original population. So it's really hard to say how well it's going to be adapted to the site. Cultivars or nativars is a similar situation, except in this case, it's almost impossible to know the original source because it's trade secrets. So very hard to find out where a cultivar came from. So we really don't know how well they're going to be performing in your landscape. The next issue is ecological services. Does a plant have all the ecological interactions that supports a healthy environment? Once again, local ecotype, because it came from here in Richmond area, will get 3 pluses because it has all the ecological interactions. Straight species, I've given 2 pluses to because you don't really know for sure where it came from. And the point I want to make is if a plant is from northern Minnesota, it's evolved over time with a different set of organisms somewhat. There will be overlapping insects that may be the same. There's just going to be some differences in the interactions with other plants, with animals, with soil microbes, etc. Once again, we come to cultivar and we really don't know. But what we do know about cultivars is that when you change things like flower color and leaves and some other flower shape like double flowers, it's known that that often impacts the ability of pollinators to feed on that plant. And also sometimes with regard to leaves, it will impact whether or not a female will lay eggs on the proper host plant. And finally, there's the issue of the potential for genetic damage. Local ecotype plants, because they came from wild populations in the area, there's no potential for genetic damage. They're part of that genetic population. Straight species, I'm going to call it relatively low, because at least with the straight species, you're getting plants that are from wild populations. And finally, back to cultivars, the important thing to realize about a cultivar is that every single plant of a cultivar is genetically identical. So if you have literally thousands of people planting the same cultivar in the environment, it's possible for that cultivar then to essentially cross-pollinate with wild populations and essentially dilute the local gene pool and damage the wild population in that way. May not be such a big issue for more common species, but especially if you're talking about species that are not really abundant in the area, that can have a real detrimental impact. Okay, back to Stacey.
Will you switch slides? There we go. Okay. So Justin had asked us to talk about, how to obtain local ecotype plants, and just some tips here. It's going to be a lot easier if you're using the species name, and avoids confusion because a lot of plants with different species will have the same common name. So when you're asking about a particular plant, just even native plants or any plant at a nursery, use the species name to avoid confusion. And then ask your plant provider what the geographic origin of the plant is. Because I think one thing that gets confusing is just because you're buying local, doesn't mean that the plants were grown from seeds that were collected locally. So you could be supporting a local nursery and buying their plants, but they're getting those plants from all over. And so you need to really ask. And I'm gonna actually have you go to the next slide, Justin. So a good source, probably the easiest way, where you can find suppliers in the Richmond area that have native plants in general. It's a campaign called Plant RVA Natives, and they have a website, and they also have a guidebook, which you can see a picture of the cover here. It is available to download for free, and I think actually the James River Association has some copies that they can give out to people. But it has a link on their website that lists wholesale and retail nurseries that offer native plants. Most of those nurseries, I want to point out that they do not carry exclusively native plants. Most of them are nurseries that carry native plants, but also non-native plants. Some still actually carry some plants that are considered invasive. And most of them are not carrying necessarily local ecotype plants. As far as we know of, we're really the only organization that's focusing on only carrying local ecotypes within the Richmond region. But a few others here in Richmond that do carry some local ecotype natives are listed here, and they are all available. You can find their link on that Plant RVA Natives link. Good Seed Natives, Molten Hot Natives, that's run by Ashley Moulton, and Molten Hot Natives carries a good deal of local ecotype plants, and LERN partners with Moulton a lot for projects. She just carries some plants where her seed sources are outside of the service area that LERN has established. So she might have her range is larger than ours. Parallel Nursery is another nursery here in Richmond, and then RVA Homegrown Natives is another local organization that carries natives. And another thing to point out is all four of these, none of these are retail nurseries that are open to the public. I think all of them you need to schedule ahead, which would give you the opportunity to email or talk to them and find out more about the plants you're trying to source, and whether or not they're a local ecotype, and the seeds that they collected are collected locally. I think there's one more slide. Oh, we're at the end. So hopefully that's answered everybody's questions about local ecotype plants, and we're really excited with this venture here. And we'd love to have people come and volunteer with us. We're going to be at the Lewis Ginter plant sale, which is a couple weeks from now. We'll be selling our plants there. So I think that ends the talk.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill and Stacey. That was fantastic. I'm going to encourage anybody who has questions for Bill and Stacey to submit them via the chat box. And I'll also say, Stacey mentioned that the James River Association does have some of these wonderful, and I'm blurring out, there we go. The James River Association has some of these wonderful plant guides for the Richmond region. If you live in the Richmond region and you would like a hard copy of one of these guides, please email me and I'll email you a copy. As Stacey pointed out, there are also digital copies are available at Plant RVA Natives or Plant Virginia Natives.
And I think they'll be having a booth at Lewis Ginter. Pretty sure if you go to Lewis Ginter plant sale, you'll be able to scoop up one of those.
Yeah, definitely. I think Department of Wildlife Resources will be there, which is formerly the Game and Inland Fisheries Department, and they have a lot of copies, and I know they're going to be there.
Fantastic. So I'll kick question and answer, our question and answer session off with a question for you, Bill and Stacey. I know that your work is focused on the Richmond region. Do you have any guidance for residents who live outside the Richmond region on where they can source local ecotype plants? Think about like the Hampton Roads region, Charlottesville region, Lynchburg, and upriver from there.
There's definitely some nurseries in the Charlottesville area. What I would suggest is the Virginia Native Plant Society has a list of native plant nurseries all across the state, and you could check out the ones in your area and do a little research to see if they actually handle local ecotype. Urban Habitats is one that's very involved in that, and I know there's other nurseries that at least handle some local ecotype plants.
And the plant Virginia Natives, which is the larger organization of which Plant RVA Natives is in, they have guides and resources for most parts of the state. And so like the Plant RVA Natives, they'll have a section on where to obtain the plants. And again, a lot of the nurseries that they list will be ones that don't necessarily exclusively have native plants, and then probably have even fewer local ecotype plants. But the Virginia Native Plant Society website that Bill mentioned, all of the nurseries that they list are only ones that supply only native plants. However, they're not going to necessarily be local ecotype plants, so you just need to ask. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing.
No, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. Katie, I see a few questions in the chat box.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure if you can see these. Looks like Andrea asked a couple of questions. What was the name of the native azalea species? And then what date is the Lewis Ginter sale?
The native species is, the common name is Pinkster Bloom azalea. The scientific name is Rhododendron periclymenoides. But good luck with that. So, but I don't think there's any other azalea with the common name of Pinkster Bloom. And maybe what I should mention is the Digital Atlas of Virginia Flora. This is an outstanding resource, and it's the go-to place to determine if a species is native to where you live. So you can put in a species name or the common name for a plant. It'll give you a map of Virginia and a little red dot in every county where it's confirmed to be native. So it's a great place to go.
And they also have an app for your phone that is very minimal. It's like $20 a year, and it has all the information that's on the atlas. And they also have a book that's about 2 inches thick and 50 pounds. It's a great resource, but all of that is available on the app that you can. It's much more portable. And then I see the question, the Lewis Ginter plant sale it starts Thursday, May 2nd and runs through Saturday, May 4th. Friday and Saturday, the time's like 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then Thursday night is for Lewis Ginter members only. But it's really, if you are a member or you know someone who's a member that you could go with, it's helpful to go in the evening from 4 to 7 on Thursday because you get first dibs. But we'll be there all 3 days.
Great. Katie, do we have additional questions?
Yeah, Diane was wondering if participants could receive links and names that have been covered today.
Absolutely, Diane. Great question. I was actually thinking about that as Bill and Stacey were providing answers. Yeah, we can compile a list of links and email all the participants of today's webinar. Happy to do that for you.
Andrea just asked another great question. She asked, when dealing with invasives in our backyards, how do we prioritize their removal? And then do we immediately reintroduce natives?
That's a complex question because it depends so much on what the invasives are and the specifics of the situation. So the first priority is to prevent an invasive species from reproducing. So you don't want it to flower and produce seeds or berries or whatever. So for vines like English ivy and winter creeper, that means the first priority is to get them off the trees. And the way you do that is you make 2 cuts in the trunk of the vine, a couple inches apart, and remove that little couple inch section. That will make everything above the cut go dead, and it'll prevent reproduction because English ivy and winter creeper don't reproduce until they're fairly high up in a tree. For shrubs, a lot of times for shrubs like the privets, nandina, things like that, the easiest thing to control them is to essentially eliminate them and prevent reproduction at the same time by cutting them and then painting immediately with a concentrated herbicide. If it's a smaller plant, you can use a weed wrench. But if you have very much material and it's big, the cut and paint method is the way to go. There's other things like loriope. It's really hard to get rid of, but the very least you can do is weed whack it late in the summer after it flowered so it can't produce berries and reproduce. So that's the first priority is always to stop reproduction. The other general comment I would make is don't necessarily start in the worst area of coverage. Sometimes it's better to start where it's not so bad and get those places under control and leave the worst places for last once you've stopped reproduction. With regard to, it is important to immediately introduce natives if it's a sunny spot. Sometimes in the shade, it's not as important because things aren't going to take over so quickly in the shade. I'll stop rambling.
And I see Andrea has a question about what herbicide is to use. I recommend maybe, Justin, if we can help provide links to you to send out to everyone, but a good source for invasive species control and removal is Blue Ridge Prism, PRISM. And they have on their website pages for different species, invasive species, and it goes into detail about how to remove them. And then they also have a link to the Virginia Department of Forestry's website, or it has a PDF document that's basically a table that lists different types of invasive plants and herbicides specifically to use for them, and safety tips and things like that. So that's a good source.
Great suggestion. Blue Ridge Prism. Yeah.
Yeah. Go-to place.
Katie, do we have any other questions?
It looks like that is it for now, Justin.
Okay.
Great. Well, if anybody has questions, we've listed the email addresses, both my email address at jdoyle@thejamesriver.org, Katie's email address at kriley@thejamesriver.org, as well as Bill and Stacey's email address at learnva@gmail.com. If you have any questions after the webinar, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to share resources. We're happy to answer questions, steer you in the right direction. And I really, really appreciate you all taking time out of your day to participate in this awesome webinar. I also want to thank Bill and Stacey. Thank you so much for the work that you do, removing invasives, proliferating local ecotypes around Richmond. you all are inspirational. I've gotten to know both of you personally over the past few years through the use of local ecotypes, and it's really, you all have changed the way that I view native plants. So thank you so much for the important work that you're doing in our region. It's wonderful. I also want to thank Altria and DuPont Clear into the Future for making this webinar possible. And I do want to put a plug in for our next webinar. It'll be about living shorelines, and it's scheduled for 1 p.m. on Tuesday, April 30th, 1 week from today. And I encourage you to visit jamesriverhero.org to learn more about our River Hero Homes program, and hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Justin.